fear, distrust, and envy for control purposes. He says distrust is stronger than trust, and envy is stronger than adoration, respect, or admiration. You must pitch the old black male against the young black male, and the young black male against the old black male. You must use the female against the male, and you must use the male against the female. You must use the dark-skinned slave against the light-skinned slave. It is necessary that your slave love, respect, and trust only us. So the black slave, after receiving this indoctrination, shall carry on for hundreds of years, maybe thousands.
Du Bois said we always have the double consciousness. We trying to be black, and meanwhile you got a white ghost hovering over your head that says if you don't do this, you'll get killed.
America has given the Negro people a bad check. A check which has come back marked insufficient funds. The idea whose time has come today. All praise is due to Allah. Hey, everybody in Harlem is a Muslim. We too have been taught by the Honorable Elijah Muhammad that we were stripped of everything we had and been cast into the fiery furnace. A land where they've been making it hot as hell for us for 400 years.
You have an opportunity to change your life. When you change your life, you will affect many other lives.
Don't let
The Gilchrist Experience. That's like living your life. You know, you just see that Muhammad Ali. We stopped at Muhammad Ali because he just passed, and he was our energy back in those days. You know, he stood up for what was right. He did the right thing, and he didn't want to go fight foreigners who weren't calling him the N-word. Now we find ourselves, 50 years later, and we seem to be in that same rut. Welcome, GRAHM Weatherspoon.
Yeah, good afternoon.
GRAHM. We're waiting on Professor Jeffries, but he's tardy as usual. Well, what do you think of this Willie Lynch syndrome?
Well, you know, we've talked about it before, and it is a reality. When forces are working against each other, even during war, leaflets were dropped on the troops. And you had a lady who was broadcasting over the military radio system and suggesting that the black troops of America turn against the American troops because of the way they were being treated in this country. We had the same thing in Vietnam. And as you mentioned, Muhammad Ali said, I'm not going there. But to see how indoctrination works and understanding it, Willie Lynch, that speech in its entirety was given on the James River in 1750-something, I can't remember the year. And this man came here from the island of Barbados to teach Americans how to treat and raise their slaves. So it was a British plantation owner that came to the U.S. colonies to teach the Americans how to indoctrinate the slaves. There's a phrase I used to use at work. I had it on my desk. He who rules the head rules the body. So if you can determine how people are thinking, you can truly determine their behavior. And that way you don't have to use physical force. You don't have to use armies. You just use the thinking of the people, which then will bring about the necessary results or the required results that you're looking for. And he said that this indoctrination could last hundreds, if not 1,000 years. But once people find a point of truth, that truth will debunk all fallacy that's been presented to them. It will be a slow change. It's not going to be a radical change. but it's like if you've been on cruise ships, and if the captain of that cruise ship has to bring that ship about 180 degrees, he's not going to abruptly turn that boat around. It's not like a speedboat. He has to slowly bring that ship about. It might take a couple of hours to bring that ship 180 degrees without causing damage to people on the ship. So Willie Lynch, in the speech, he was teaching plantation owners that if you use the mind, if you predetermine the thinking of the slave, you will know the behavior of the slave, and the slave will then reproduce, not just physically, but mentally, the behavior pattern that you wish your slaves to have. And it did work for a long period of time.
It's still working now.
Precisely. It's still working today.
That's the main reason why I played this, for you youngsters out there, that people watch people like Muhammad Ali evolve, and us as a people evolve. It's an important lesson to learn from the past, you know, so you can see a brighter future. You see what's happening today. I mean, Donald Trump is brainwashing, 13 million Republicans to believe what?
And now they claim they don't want him.
Watch what they're doing.
He's the product of what they. He's the product of the seeds that they sowed.
You got a Republican who used to be a Democrat, who was a billionaire and a con man, a New York con man, and he's obviously catering to a certain mindset of Americans.
And the question is now whether or not he has the fiscal capability of maintaining his campaign.
Right.
Because he has nothing in the coffers to, he said he was self-funded, and they put out a call for funds just yesterday, but he doesn't have $1 billion to fall back on. The last election with Barack Obama and the Mormon fellow from out west, they each spent over $1 billion that campaign, on their campaigns. So we know that he can't afford to spend $1 billion on a campaign. He's the master of foreclosures. That college or university, Trump University.
What about the mindset of the people, that are 14 million people that voted for him so far?
Well, look at the people who were running with the Tea Party and the conservatives that are running with the overall Republican Party, who didn't want health care, who railed against Barack Obama, but a lot of those people, they themselves didn't even have health care.
Right.
People in the heartland of America, they didn't have...
Because they were brainwashed.
Didn't have pension funds. Corporations closed down, vacated.
All right, let's go to the rest of that roll, and we'll be right back at you. I think Professor Jeffries is here. Okay? Let's go back to the roll-in, and we'll finish that up and get Dr. Jeffries on this set.
Don't let the white men speak for you. It's time for you and me to stand up for ourselves.
You're a part of the indoctrination. It goes from generation to generation, from father to son.
I saw Sonny Liston a few days ago, Cash. Ain't he ugly? He's too ugly to be the world champ. The world champ should be pretty like me.
Well, he told me to bet my life that you wouldn't go 3 rounds.
Well, if you want to lose your money, then bet on Sonny.
I'm not just a boxer. I'm taught by Elijah Muhammad. I'm educated. Even Oxford University, your biggest seat lawyers offer me professorship in philosophy and poetry to come in and teach.
They might be stopping us. That might be all, ladies and gentlemen. Get up there.
I'm not just an ordinary player. I can talk all week on millions of subjects, and you do not have enough wisdom to corner me on television.
Cassius Clay is a name no more, is that right?
Yes, sir. It's Muhammad Ali. Muhammad means worthy of all praises, and Ali means most high.
You have an opportunity. You have an opportunity, my brother. No, my son. It's not complicated. You gotta care about people, man. I care about you, Ken.
The so-called American Negroes have to be completely re-educated. He has to be completely made over again. In the condition that he is now in, he's not fit for self.
My method is simple. You must pitch the old black male against the young black male against the old. You must use a dark-skinned slave against a light-skinned slave. Distrust and envy.
I quit taking drugs in 1958 after I heard the program of the Honorable Elijah Muhammad. This is the only thing that ever gave me inspiration or the strength not to use narcotics.
Get your hands up.
The Black Panther Party for Self-Defense calls upon the American people in general, and the black people in particular, to take careful note of the racist California legislature, which is now considering legislation aimed at keeping the black people disarmed and powerless at the very same time racist police agencies throughout the country are intensifying the terror, brutality, murder, and repression of black people. Peoples of the world are demanding that Huey P. Newton be set free. So in defense of our lives, for the survival of black people and human beings of the world, we all say in solidarity that Huey P. Newton must be set free or the sky is the limit around the world.
Violence is a part of America's culture. It is as American as cherry pie.
I hear this a lot from young people saying they had no idea there were any women in the civil rights movement. They had no idea there were any women in the Black Panther Party. Of course there were women. There were women leaders in the civil rights movement. There were women leaders in the Black Panther Party.
We are ready for change, and whether a doctor is there or not, the water has broke, the blood has spilled, a new black baby is gonna be born. No more yes the boss, no more bowing and scraping. We are 25 million strong. Cut us in or cut it out. It is a new ball game. When we come together, what time is it? When we respect each other, what time is it? When we let ourselves confident, what time is it? When we form our own political party, what time is it?
1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9.
My guess is that $50 million wouldn't do it, but it is worth it to this country. If that will do the job, pay $50 million.
Appearing instead a large quantity of very pure, very cheap heroin.
The drug trade always supports the government's internal political agenda. It has never not supported government's internal political agenda.
20 years ago, Britain's first anti-police riot of the 20th century erupted on the streets of Brixton. 1981.
What does this respect, the word respect mean to you guys? What is respect?
It's just when you're with people, you can't get hotted up or something. Just little things like that, that's all you want.
It's a beef thing, it's gonna be a beef thing.
But why? Why?
Don't care, don't care. It's never gonna stop. Any I see, they're getting bored or something, where when you get caught slipping, means you're off guard, you're getting caught off guard, you're off point. You know,
so, it's like how you said, yeah, if you caught a Brixton boy over there, that's
he's slipping in the
yeah.
That's what I'm saying.
What's he doing right here by himself?
Out of his area, in the wrong area.
Why is he getting more violent?
Money, innit? Paper chase, innit? Everyone wants money. Anyone will do anything for money.
And how do you get money then?
Everything, innit?
From robbing drug dealers, anything like that, innit?
Where are all the guns coming from?
The government, innit? The government.
Okay, alright, everyone says the government, but why would it be in their interest to hand out guns? What was the reaction amongst you guys when you heard about the boys being shot, particularly the ones who got shot in their own houses.
Tell you the truth, when I heard about that, I just thought, boy, he's dead straight. You see what I'm saying? I didn't give a fuck. As long as it weren't me.
You know, I don't think they want this to stop. I think it employs too many people. Judges, lawyers, cops, politicians, prison guards, probation officers. Stop bringing dope into this country, about 100,000 people are going to be out of a job.
The Willie Lynch syndrome. As you see, that's still going on today, well and well. And we're just dealing with the 60s. You saw all our vibrant leaders, you know, in their youth, Jesse, Muhammad Ali, Malcolm, all of us. You and I were both back there in those days, raising hell, right?
Young leader.
Freedom, freedom, freedom. Here we are, old elder statesmen, and the stuff's still going on. What's the system analysis of this one?
Well, I think when you raise the question of systems and systems analysis, that allows us to understand that we're not just dealing with episodes, we're not dealing with even epochs. You're dealing with a full understanding of the system, and the greatest system understanding that we need now is that we're in the clutches of an enormous global system of white supremacy. And it has its deep roots. You can go back, if you want, many, you can go back a couple of thousand years, but for us, I think 500 years is the period of time that Dr. John Henry Clark and others would say, let's deal with that. What happened to the world 500 years ago when the European left his world and began to expand around Africa and then across the ocean to the so-called New World?
Instead of that, let's update ourselves to Donald Trump, the white supremacist of today.
Well, he's a perfect example of why we need a systems analysis.
Okay.
You can get caught in understanding him through a personal circumstance and situation that he finds himself in.
A slick New Yorker, that's all he is.
But if you put that label on him, then you're gonna, you face the possibility of what I call a paralysis of analysis.
Okay.
You focus on the personality.
But that's what he is. That's his nature.
He has been produced by a system. He did not produce the system. He has learned to master the system and to be the super image of the system. And so, looking at him and through him, you see the depths of the system. This nation, for example, was not founded on freedom, justice, and equality.
Right.
It was founded on rich white men with property and power that institutionalized their control over the system. So what are we talking about in terms of Trump? A rich white man who is seeking property and power. And he is the par excellence, the property dealer. I just passed, rushing here, I just passed the international Trump Towers that everybody talks about.
Yeah.
And ironically, it's a black glass structure. But move past the personalities into systems. Every system has three major components: economics, the productive creative capability of peoples; politics, the management and the administration of the system of economics; and culture. Those three elements will help us to understand in a deep way Trump and any other political leader or groups of political leaders that are in our midst. So you have to raise the economic question. What is this Trump? He represents the best of the American tradition. He is politically, he's attempting to maneuver the political system, which the American founding fathers, all of them slave owners, had a revolt to get a larger share of the British slaving system. And so they put in place a political structure. That wasn't a democracy, it was an oligarchy. It was ruled by propertied people. Even this election for Trump and others, we're thinking about the presidential popular vote. The system was established so there wouldn't be a popular vote for the president. The president was elected by property people called the Electoral College. So you could have the popular vote in favor of an individual, and the Electoral College vote would be just the opposite. So deep understanding is what we need, and that will prevent us from getting all excited, all out of joint about who is what and what is going to happen. There's going to be a pressure of African peoples, and it's not going to stop until we resist it, and it's not going to be a permanent stop until we have our own system capability.
There's been a
What about the whole idea of, the way we were brainwashed, the Willie Lynch syndrome, and all this idea that America's for the people who work hard. And there are people that worked hard and come up through the system and succeeded. I mean, you're a typical one, and you're succeeding, all right, but you're doing what you want to do.
Succeeding to kick butt whenever I can,
right,
to expose the system.
All right.
And as a result, I don't.
But still, we're living in the system and surviving and thriving.
Because the system works against those who seriously protested or who are.
But how about using the system to benefit us?
It's the only thing.
Like getting out and voting.
Well, here's what we need to say. Systems analysis says it's the only game in town. We just buried Dr. Frances Cress Welsing. She used to tell us over the years, decades, that we're playing on the white side of the chessboard. There is not a real game for us on the black side of the chessboard. And so the existing system is a system, even Malcolm said it, ballot or the bullet. When in point of fact, it's the ballot and the bullet.
Okay.
And so we have to have a system understanding, but we have to understand that that's not our system. That system is going to work against our interests.
Armed resurrection won't work.
Armed resurrection will keep some people off your back. However, because it's a system, they're going to come back at you and even tighten up the system even more. We exploded in the 60s. That was a wonderful thing to see our cities exploding and black people resisting their oppression. But the larger system said, we've got to tighten it up. We've got to be more unscrupulous. We got to dump drugs systematically in their communities. We have to suck them up on a welfare check. Our people were hardworking peoples. We didn't live on a welfare check. We had jobs, little jobs, big jobs, 2 or 3 jobs. But they sucked us in on the welfare system and then took the young people because the McCone report, I was the head of the CIA, who after the explosion in Watts, which was one of the major explosions of the 60s, the McCone report said the dynamite in the cities that's going to continue to explode is the black male youth between 15 and 25. And he has to be devastated. And so a national plan was put in place. They're talking about a poverty program and this and that. When they put in place a destructive program, it was a massive war against black people. At the same time, the political games were being played, the economic poverty programs, model cities were being played, and they had a plan to make sure that they stayed on top. The rich, I'm not talking about ordinary white folks, I'm talking about rich white folks. But you use ordinary white folks' ignorance and their fear of a rise of black people to control your political game. That's what Trump is doing. He's a master at this now.
This is the proliferation of Willie Lynch. It's the same agenda. It's being worked. And as you said, the paralysis of analysis. If you're not analyzing what you're seeing, this is the same old game just being done in a different way. So as fear sets in with white people, desperation sets in with black people. The wealthy are not concerned because they're going to make money whether the economy is up or down. They're going to make money. And then the corralling of black people from the 60s on, just as he said, you've got to break the young bucks. Willie Lynch. You got to break the strongest bucks that you have. So they become incarcerated. Then you have mama who looks and shelters the one boy, the good boy, so that he's not going to even rise up against the system for his own freedom. All of these things still carry over. So they're still using Willie Lynch, but they're doing it in a different way.
Of course.
Today, looking at our black youth, I saw a lady was on television today. She was getting something out of her pocketbook, and the guy came up, grabbed her, knocked her down, and took her purse and left. Now, that's Willie Lynch. That's Willie Lynch. The fact that you saw it in the video, what was going on in Brixton, with the killings that were going on in Brixton in the 80s, and I was in Brixton in the late 90s, it had entirely changed by that time. But the same attitude, the guys didn't really care about who was getting killed. He said, as long as it wasn't me, I don't care. So the thinking, the breakdown in the community the destruction of the families, the absence of fathers. Girls need fathers just as much as boys need fathers. Because if a girl doesn't have a father in the home, what kind of man is she going to be gravitating to as she gets older? If she doesn't have a strong male figure to show her the difference between Slick Willie and Nice Guy Joe or whoever that might be. So the families were devastated. What was that, the senator from New York that wrote that book?
Moynihan.
Senator
Moynihan wrote a book on the black family.
Oh, man.
Talking about the pathology of the black family and putting the blame on the victims. When someone could have written a similar book in the 1850s and 1860s and 1870s about the pathology of the Irish family, which was imposed upon them as the exploited of the period of time. So that's why I say we can't freeze the history around one individual, one circumstances. Even the Willie Lynch syndrome represents how people control other people.
Right, exactly.
I don't think there's a document actually brought from Barbados, but the practices that were perfected in the Caribbean and perfected in Brazil were also spread to other parts where the system of enslavement took place. But systems analysis is key. We have to have an analysis to know where do we strike in the system to prevent it from devastating us. So you got to be in it. We're in it, but we're not in it with our eyes open, with our consciousness. We're in it mad and sad. When I'm saying you're in it, so get glad and get prepared. When the biggest attack in the history of the world came on me, because I was saying we need to put the truth in the curriculum in New York, and then that would spread across the country, people said, destroy him. He's the worst thing since Hitler. How can you compare a professor with Hitler? However, the idea was to scare people away from this enormous truth and prevent them from reversing the brainwashing process by having a consciousness that allows them to look and analyze and then allows them to self-liberate. Empowerment means...
You're going back how many years?
We're just going back the
30 years.
The Albany critique and evaluation of the curriculum by 4 scholars, myself being the head scholar, was in 1989. We produced the Curriculum of Inclusion report in the fall of '89. By the 90s, we were talking about how can you implement this. By '91, they said if they implement this, the real story of the human family, that the human family begins in Africa with African peoples, and not in some myths and legends that we have now put in our biblical narrative, that the highest level of civilization and culture does not come out of Greece or England or Germany, comes out of the Nile Valley rivers, the Niger Valley rivers, the Tigris Euphrates rivers. And so we said, put that truth in the curriculum. They said, no, we're going to raise as much hell around this person who's going to be, he's going to be...
Now 30 years later, and you have no signs of it.
But because we knew we knew what our truth was. We were going to live with this truth and die with this truth. So when instead of me getting on my knees, in fact, my wife said, do not pull a Jesse Jackson. Do not, no, we're not asking for no excuse. And we were in Africa. This is my wife saying, we're going to fight no matter what. When your wife says you're going to fight, how the hell can you not say you're going to fight? We went to the greatest of the Africans at the time, that was the leaders of Ghana, and they said, we'll be fighting with you. We went to the chief priestess of Ashanti that protects the golden stool of king, and she said, we're going to be. Once we realized that this was more than just an individual circumstance, this was a global fight of African empowerment, we said, we got to come up to the task. So instead of us asking for accepting the $500,000 offered by the City University to step out of the system. $500,000 offered.
Back in 89, 90?
$500,000 offered in the early 90s.
Early 90s.
But we said it's not about money. It's about the consciousness of African peoples. It's about the liberation of the African mind. And so we went to 350 universities and colleges around the world in response. We didn't go and say, let's make a deal. We said we're going to take this truth and empower our people. Harvard, Yale, Princeton, as well as all of the black schools, as well as the schools in the Caribbean, as well as the schools in Brazil, and University of Brazil, in England, in Holland, and Germany, and France. So wherever I went, I said, don't get mad. Get prepared. Don't be sad. and get glad.
So
and
where do we go?
forget about the behind and get into your African mind. Stop worrying about the looks and get into the books. But this consumer-driven culture that has us consuming garbage has us worrying about the looks. We spend more on looks as African people than any people in the world. We spend more on hair. So we're worried about the hair and not about and the behind and not about the mind. So our great struggle, and I'm glad your program is a part of that, is to highlight these contradictions and to keep pushing our people in the right direction. I would like to end this segment.
How do we prepare ourselves for Hillary as president?
Well, first, before we get there, let's take a brother who fought his way out of enslavement and became the symbol of the opposition to enslavement, Frederick Douglass. He said it best, if there is no struggle, there's no progress.
That's right.
There has to be struggle. But he went deeper. He said, those who profess the favor of freedom say they want freedom, yet deprecate agitation, don't want you to agitate about it, are men, and we can add women, who want the crops without plowing up the ground. They want the rain without the thunder and lightning. They want the ocean without the awful roar of its many waters. This is an enslaved person who is seeing the larger system and understanding both sides of it.
And you might make a note that this was the master's son.
The master's son, who was smart enough to deaden the master's influence in his consciousness and raise up his mother, the African influence. And he went on to say, those who profess the favor of freedom yet deprecate agitation are men who want the crops without plowing out the ground, they want the rain without the thunder and lightning, they want the ocean without the roar of its many waters. Power concedes nothing. And you got to make your demands. Find out what any people will quietly submit to. And you have found out the exact measure of injustice and wrong which will be imposed upon them until they are resisted with either words or blows or both. So it's ballot and bullet. It's words and blows. It's understanding the system. If you keep messing with us and you attempt to destroy us, we'll bring the mother down. And that's where we use that leverage. But you got to have a system. You just don't flail and shoot and kill and killing your own people. You have to have a plan.
There's a problem. There's a problem.
Jesse was at the Gary conference when they were talking about a plan. They were talking about the black community and black family. And the Black Panthers were talking about a plan. Black Studies was talking about a plan. The Dr. Amos Wilsons and others that came up out of Mississippi and went to Morehouse and then went to the Jesuit schools here in New York. They were talking about a plan to empower African people. That's what is missing. We have somebody else's plans. We got the Democratic plan. We got the Republican plan. We got the Communist plan. Where is the African plan? Where is the Pan-African plan that can be put up against these other plans so we can negotiate our survival and our development?
Now, address the Hillary situation, which we're coming into 2017. Hillary's going to be president.
But whether she is president or not, we have to have our own plans.
Okay.
We have to have
so what's our plan with Hillary as
capability.
president?
Frederick Douglass said it best. Power concedes nothing without demand. It never did. It never will. We can't expect her to make plans for us. We have to make the plans and say, these are the plans to support the family. These are the plans for jobs. These are the plans for relief of our mortgage situation. Because you owe us. This system from its very beginning was developed on our backs and out of our brain and our blood.
The last program we did with Gimme, we were talking about what the Clintons did in the Congo.
But just why limit it to the Clintons?
Because a Clinton's going to be president.
What the Rockefellers did in the Congo, what the Rothschilds did in the Congo.
I want to deal with a President Clinton.
Yes,
that's what I'm talking about. So you said we have to make a system analysis to deal with the President.
Are you trying to calm me down? I'm trying to raise some hell.
But
and get I
want a plan.
And you're trying to cool me out and tell me to be professional and be professorial.
Plan.
So we need a global.
I want investment. I want to see an investment team from here go to the Congo, get some of those $24 trillion there, with Gimme as president of the Congo.
But because we only have the world global system, which is dominated by the European concept of white supremacy, no matter what wealth we get, we won't be able to use it in a serious way for our own people. No matter how much wealth out of the Congo
there's no hope then.
No, you can't say there's no hope. My grandfather was murdered by the Klan 100 years ago.
Yeah.
And he was born with one foot in slavery.
Yeah.
And so if he had said there's no hope, there wouldn't have been no me. There wouldn't have been 13 of kids that he had. he was able to survive enslavement in the first clan. He didn't survive the rise of the second clan. But in the meantime, his brother had 15 kids, and he had 13 kids. They got their land. They built their schools. They built their churches. They built their institutions. They had the Masonic order. So they provided a survival institutional system so that there would be a bridge that would allow me to come in and talk about an African global system. And so, and Yemi is talking about we need serious leaderships that's part of an African global system, but we have not met, and we have not laid it out the way we should. We only have remnants of the European system, and the European is so masterful at trickology, just like he had black folk work on his behalf doing enslavement. He had black folk working on his behalf doing desegregation and segregation and discrimination. He has black folk working on his behalf in colonialization and independence. He has us working for him. So we have to have a systems analysis. You can't be a president. You're here for a short period of time, and as much time as you have, you better be able to kick some butt. But you got to have an understanding of why you're doing it.
It's not about you, it's about the people coming behind you.
That's right.
I got a treat for you. Play that Dr. Jeffries and Dr. Clark from Gil Noble show. This short piece. Gil Noble, remember?
Never heard of her.
My buddy. Are you kidding?
I'm thinking about Dr. Asa Hill.
No,
Dr.
Gil
Asa Hill,
Noble.
or his partner,
Like it
Ray
is.
Noble. Oh, you mean our brother Gilbert.
The man.
Hey.
Benin and Ife. There was a flowering in the Sudanic areas of the Niger River Belt, where there were the successive empires of Ghana, Mali, and Songhai. In the New World, there was a flowering in the high Andes of the Inca peoples, and in Central America of the Mayans, and the Aztecs later contributing to that development. So there was this flowering. So we have to ask ourselves, what happened? My approach is that there was a 50-year turning point of history, 1482 to 1536. In that period of time, by accidents of history, the European was able to move from the wings of history onto center stage and push everybody else off.
And what was the
accidents
vehicle?
Of history.
What was the vehicle?
Those circumstances that came from Professor Clark talks about the icebox of Europe. The Europeans wanting to get to the wealth of the people of the sun. The tales of Marco Polo had fed into this. The pilgrimage of Mensa Musa, the great African emperor who went from his nation in Mali across North Africa onto Mecca, 1324-25. So this greed and this need for other people's wealth became real.
But how could a people from a continent in decline overcome a continent that was in full flower?
Well, you've got to take into consideration who had the gun and who did not have the gun. In Europe's isolation, they had lost the concept of longitude and latitude. The Africans, Arabs, and the Berbers at the University of Salamanca in Spain had preserved the information on the maritime skill coming out of the great technical nation of that day, China. Once the European learned what to do with ships at sea again, he realized that he had to get outside of Europe to find some food. He's looking to Asia for the great spices, looking for something, the sweets and the spices, something to put on that gosh darn awful European food so he could eat it. He discovered Africa en route. They did not come to West Africa looking for slaves at first. They came looking for an ally. They had heard of an African king called Prester John. And he was supposedly a Christian king. And they were looking for an African Christian king to be an ally so they would fight the infidel Arabs who had blocked their trade in the Mediterranean.
The gunpowder was evolved in China, is that true?
Yeah.
All right, is that where, so the European got it from his travels to China? Is that how?
You can see the information about the technical achievements of China was translated by Arabs and African translators at the University of Salamanca. Remember, this period in history, there was only two great universities in the world functioning. Salamanca in Spain, partly controlled by Africans and Arabs, and Saint-Corrie at Timbuktu, solely controlled by Africans.
Now, there is also the story that is thrown up that the African participated in the slave trade. Dr. Jeffries, what is your response to that? Is it so? And if so, what was the nature of that participation?
Well, that question has come up to us often in our classes, for example. Didn't Africans participate in the slave trade? There was involvement of Africans in the slave trade, but the slave trade was an institution that was internationally planned, conceived in Europe, imposed upon Africa. You before asked the question of the technology. Professor Clark explained that the Europeans had the guns. They were on a war footing. They were constantly involved in war. The 1300s is referred to as the first 100 years war between England and France. They talk about a 100-year struggle. European being on war footing when he came in contact with the Africans. His desire was for the wealth, and he was scheming and plotting to take that. But as Professor Clark was saying, the first involvement along the coast of Africa, 1482, when the Portuguese built the fort at Elmina, was not for enslavement, it was for gold. And that's why we refer to that area as the Gold Coast. And for decades, that was the bulk of the trade, gold. But the Europeans also were involved in a struggle internationally with Islam.
And the
Fascinating.
Continuation of that was that the European, with the struggle with Islam, no longer could go through the Mediterranean. So he was looking to go around the Mediterranean. And so the Portuguese were looking to go around Africa to get to Asia, and the Spanish, with Columbus's idea, said, we'll go across the Atlantic Ocean, and they discovered a new world. Then they had new lands and new people to exploit. And they tried to work it, and they exploited the Native Americans. The Native Americans was devastated by the European sickness, his diseases, his war footing. And so he brought in the foundation, they brought in the foundation of the human family, the Africans, who had the ability to resist these diseases and the ability to sustain himself. And so it was the African that saved the day. And so they were being brought over systematic by European institutions that are the foundation of the capitalist system, the corporate structures, the joint stock companies, the Dutch East Indian companies becomes the model in 1601. Then it is followed by the Dutch West Indian Company in 1621. Then it's followed by the Danish Company in 1637, the Swedish Company in 1649, the British Company in 1655, the French Company, the German Company in 1682. The Germans are always the Johnny-come-latelys. These were the mechanisms, parastatals. They had economic, political, and cultural power to impose themselves on the world. So when they came and discovered some other people, they had the military to knock the other people out, then they claimed their lands. So that God gave them these lands. So they started selling other people's lands. This whole history needs to be understood. There weren't any discoverers. These were predators, serious predators. And they didn't come because Africans had Africans to trade. Africans had domestic servitude. They had no need. The chiefs worked in the fields as well as other people. But once you got the plantation economy devised by the European and imposed on the New World, then you had this need for this labor. They tried their own people, it didn't work. They tried the Native Americans, they died out. And then the foundation of the human family, African peoples, were brought into the picture, and they not only sustained themselves for hundreds of years, they are now ready to sustain a rise of African peoples into the future. So that's why you can't be oppressed and depressed, and you got to have a flow of historical
So I see we're rising up again because of this knowledge of the past. How do we deal with Hillary as president?
Well, first she has to get elected as president.
But we're going to put her in there.
Yeah, but whoever's in there will have to use as much clout as possible, because she's going to have demands coming in from women, white women. She's going to have demands coming in from various ethnic groups, such as well-organized groups like the Jewish groups. She's going to have demands coming in from the gay groups that are well-organized. So if we as African people do not organize,
I just want to claim the Congo, okay? I just want that little piece of the pie.
Forget the Congo.
Because that's European anyway.
No, no.
The Belgian and the French?
The problems are so deep. Unless you develop a solving of problems in West Africa, and in Southern Africa and in East Africa, so that collectively you can focus on the deep problems of the Congo. The Congo is not just devastated by the Clinton policies of the 90s. The Congo was devastated hundreds of years ago by the popes. The popes before the Belgians. You're talking about 500 years ago when it was the popes who said they're going to use Catholicism to mess with the Congo. And so there's a relationship of 500 years of the most devastating dehumanization that reaches a particular point when we have the Columbus period.
Right.
Before Columbus, you have the popes. You have the Columbus period. Then you have the fights over the discoveries, etc. With Leopold, and then you have Leopold claiming it as a personal preserve. That's why I think we need to explain, how the hell can one white man, king of a land that is 80 times smaller than the Congo, how can he claim it as his personal preserve? What kind of insanity says that you have the personal property of people who have been there for millions of years and who are millions in number? How the hell can you? So these are the things that we need to
But they had
explain.
the gun.
At that point, they had the Gatling gun, which was the granddaddy or grandmama of the machine gun.
Right.
So that you could have 10,000 Zulu warriors charging on 200 Europeans and their black allies on a hill, and if they have 4 machine gun nets, they could wipe the 10,000 out. Now, the European, in the new period of our independence and our struggle to control our destiny, the European has the nuclear capability. And so wherever we look, there is this capability. Now, the nuclear capability allowed him to destroy Hitler and destroy Japan, but now he has the technology of this high-tech technology that he can...
Social media.
Well, that's just a manifestation. What I'm saying is that we have to deal with economics, politics, and culture as a systemic process. We have to understand what has happened to us, do an analysis, resist it, and then we have to build for our future. We can't expect people to build for us. Hillary Clinton will do what she has to do if we have a black agenda, if we have strategic people in places, if we have the Black Caucus saying the rule between the Democrats and the Republicans is so tenuous, you can't even get a proper vote. The key vote in that process is not the Tea Party. The key vote is the 45 or so African Americans with the Latino votes who will decide what type of legislation is going to pass, so Clinton won't get any of her own legislation gone through if she does not cooperate with getting that legislation for it. You have to use whatever you have.
That's what Adam did with Johnson.
Yes, a master.
To get the vote in '65 for the Voting Rights Act.
Right.
He held Johnson up. He said, until you sign that bill, you get nothing.
And what is significant about Adam, he was a preacher. He used his base of 20,000+ people, one of the largest churches in America, white or black. And then he was smart enough to understand the political arena. He was protesting on the streets of Harlem in the 40s. Black people couldn't even go into the stores and try clothes on.
Woolworths.
They couldn't eat in the restaurants in Harlem on 125th Street. So he had a history of struggle. But he was smart enough, having been a part of the white system, having gone to the white schools, to analyze it. So he knew that the committee structure in the Congress held in hostage legislation, even for white folks. They had what they called the pocket veto, the chairman of all these committees, and all of them was Southern dominated because election after election after election, the white folks sent their Southerners. So they controlled legislation in America. He broke that hold on labor and education on his committee, and he produced 67 or 68 major bills. Nobody has ever had that type of influence because they understood the system. But the system said, you may understand us, but you're going to pay a price. And so they ran him out of the Congress for doing things that they had institutionalized, junkets, These old white men, 90 years old, going on junkets with these young white women where they could just sniff and look. They couldn't do nothing. Adam went on a junket, and he took on his show. He took a secretary here, he took a stenographer here, and he went on his junkets, and Adam was junketing, and he made that. And, so
and that was his downfall in the end.
Yes, that's why I said we got to understand some of the mistakes that we made, as well as some of the strengths.
But how about today with your nephew in the Congress?
That's Professor. He was a professor too, attorney Hakeem Jeffries, who graduated.
And he had something to say about Trump.
NYU
my congressman.
Yeah.
My congressman.
Yes.
It's personal.
Well, he represents a whole generation of bright, intelligent young folks that we have to keep on our side of the struggle. The larger system will do anything to have that brain power, that understanding, that heart on their side of the system. So there is a struggle for the African mind and a struggle for the African behind, and we've got to win it. The elders have
How
to
about
be
Obama when he becomes a civilian again, another community organizer?
We have to learn that we did not use
system analysis
we did not use
of
enough
Obama.
pressure on Obama to deliver. He was trying to manage a system, a global system, and his program of jobs and education and whatever else he wanted to do had to be held in hostage. We need to learn from what he wanted to do and what he could do. And as we have young, great young men like Hakeem Jeffries, and he's got a brother, Dr. Hassan Jeffries. There's thousands of them. We have to win them to our side and tell them, yes, you are in the American system. You have to make it try to realize its ideals, and that's going to be difficult.
That's right.
But you also have to force it to take care of the foundation people of this nation and the universe. And that's the Native American peoples and the African peoples and their cousins, the Latinos. Unless we can come up with an agenda that links those people and their interests, meaning our people and their interests together, rich white men will continue to work the system. Here you have the system collapsing in 2008. And as you analyze it, the middle class was devastated, white and black. The only people who benefited from that destruction were the richest of the rich. They've gotten richer.
Right.
So white folks are being sold a bill of goods. You have this rich white man in there. He's going to help you out. No, he's not. He's going to help other rich white folks. That's their fraternity, taking care of themselves and using whites against themselves and use whites against blacks.
But
and using other
don't you think Donald Trump is really showing a real game? But he's showing a real game.
Yes, if you look past his personality. Look
He's
how
showing
he
a real
uses
game.
money. Look how he uses images. Look how he is an insidious racist. The Central Park case that we had here in New York.
I played that last week.
Everybody in the northern part of America should know, because there was key states, Ohio, Pennsylvania, New York. Those are the states that are going to decide what happens in this election. And it should be shown that he called for the death penalty.
That's right.
He wasn't going to accept that these young black men could have been programmed by the system. And that was a key to what has happened since then. Black young men are arrested.
Railroaded.
They may have a joint in their pocket, and then they're given all these charges. And so hundreds of thousands, if not millions of them, are being rotated in this system.
That's right.
The Central Park case is a classic case of rich men saying, destroy them. They're predators.
Right.
When the most significant predators in the history of the world are rich white men who've gone around the world raping, pillaging, stealing people's lands, and then claiming the world for themselves and doing it in the name of God.
Amen.
You know, it's interesting because I also thought about the assistant DA on that case, who has made millions of dollars writing books.
Her name?
Well,
but she has been touring the country. Susan? No. She's been touring the country for years, advocating against... Feinstein. No, not Feinstein. Help me? Linda Fairstein. Thank you.
Fairstein.
A voice out of the past. Linda Fairstein. Thanks, baby. My wife. Linda Fairstein has made millions of dollars touring the country, lecturing, making money off this case when she and other people wrongfully railroaded these guys. And you look, it took the confessions of a Latino brother who saw a brother suffering in prison with depression, serving time for a crime he did not commit, and he went and called his attorney and said, I have to confess to what I have done. And the guy said, I'm a Christian now, I have to confess. And they tried to refute everything he said, but he gave every detailed bit of that crime.
And the DNA match.
And then they still didn't want them to get any type of recompense, no remuneration, nothing. We have Ken Thompson in Brooklyn. 20-some-odd people have come out of jail in the last year and a half since he took office in Brooklyn because people have been wrongfully convicted, serving 18, 16 years for murders and rapes that they didn't commit.
And now they want to accuse him of some missteps in his office over certain situations. And so we're up against the system.
And Charles Hines is still walking around the street.
That's right. And so it's up to us, and you need to use your program, as you have been, to raise these issues and contradictions. So that's why I'm always glad to bust my back to get here.
It's a treat.
If there is no struggle, there's no progress.
I love showing you the old energies.
Yeah, but
you look good, man. You look good, man.
You cut it off. When Dr. Clark and I got into a heavy thing,
we can go out
in terms
next
of
time.
systems analysis.
See where. All right.
And this is the Soweto week, the 16th of June. The African young men and women inspired by Malcolm X's struggle in the 50s and 60s in the U.S., they exploded in the 70s. And they were subject to the same type of death and destruction of young people elsewhere, but they resisted. And they unraveled, that's the big major strand that unraveled the system of apartheid. Not Nelson Mandela and his pronouncements from jail, but the blood of the lamb, the blood of the children. I just see Hester Peter holding that young child after being destroyed by the guns of the South Africans.
And Juneteenth.
Juneteenth is a part of it. And of course my wife's
as usual,
birthday.
We run out of time.
No, you just like Gil Noble. You need to get 2 hours. You shouldn't even start nothing serious if we can't get into a
It's always a
serious
pleasure, Doc. But, you know, we've had a system analysis today, and with Hillary as president, Trump is no chance of him making it.
And a black caucus organized to use its leverage to have a black agenda for jobs, for housing. And our race has been criminalized.
That's what
Dr. Shashi McIntyre wrote a book, Criminalizing a Race. And so we have to decriminalize this
and
race.
With that, thank you for coming. It's been a Gilchrist Experience. The God in me loves the God in you. And stay tuned for more of Gilchrist Experience. Thank God. Peace go with you. Power to the people.